Thanks for the recording, Maria. From the Untitled team, we are a community for young people creating the careers tomorrow. If you aren't in our community Slack channel, definitely join Earlywork.co/communities. We have awesome events like this, as well as a whole bunch of other intimate meetups with different channels. So I would love to see you in there if not already. But we are joined by two awesome guests, which I'll give a quick introduction on, and then would love to hand it over to them to get a bit more about them. So we have Utsav Somani, partner at AngelList India, the world's largest startup platform. Also recently founder and partner at Galaxy Fund, which we're very excited to learn more about, which is a $45 million fund that will allocate $1 million to select Indian founders to invest. Welcome, Utsav. Appreciate you joining us from India.
Thanks so much, John. My pleasure.
Our other awesome esteemed speaker is Mayuresh Patole, co-founder of Chronicle, fast and interactive alternative to presentations backed by Accel and angels from some of the leading companies in the world like Apple, Facebook, Google, Stripe, and the list goes on. I had to cut some off. Before founding Chronicle, Mayuresh worked for both BCG Consulting and Digital Ventures. Welcome, Mayuresh.
Thanks a lot, John. Glad to be here. Hey, everyone.
Awesome. Well, I think we'll hear a bit more about you, Mayuresh, a bit later, but I would love to hand over to Utsav and hear a bit more about his story and how he got to where he is today.
My story, I think pretty uninspiring for the most part. I think last 5 years I've spent at AngelList, but I think before that I spent my undergrad in Singapore. I did information systems and finance, was a self-taught coder there, so worked across a bunch of tech firms and finance roles. Finance was my second major there. I think that's where the combination of finance and technology really got into my early days, and ended up doing a master's in innovation entrepreneurship. I think one of the worst courses to learn to do, because you technically cannot learn about entrepreneurship without doing it. Unfortunately, never had the idea to jump, which got me out of bed every single day. So I was dabbling across a bunch of jobs, and I think I was consulting for this online platform which used to matchmake investors and founders in India. And we'll come to the history of Indian startup ecosystem on why AngelList worked. But 2016 was when I discovered all the problems across the previous 2 years of my working with another startup platform, which was more like an online investment banking platform where you matchmake investors and take a certain piece of the cut, right? So your upside is pretty much limited to the transaction size at that point of time. And in early stage startups, I think the transaction size is fairly small. And that's when I heard Naval and Tim Ferriss on a podcast. And that was the first time I got introduced sort of to the man and the legend, Naval Ravikant, and truly learned about his philosophy, then discovered the company AngelList. I had a profile to find jobs on the platform. It's one of the most used startup hiring platforms as well. But I think the more interesting piece was syndicates. And syndicates truly solve for this triangle of angel investing, where now it's morphed into becoming the AWS of angel investing, where it scales as people use it as the backend infrastructure to do their investing practice. And up until that point, right, up until recently in the history, I think all of the problems in angel investing has been, doing venture style investing or institutional angel investing has been that it's been restricted to people who are doing it full time, right? The idea is that with AngelList now, you can literally run your own company, run your own anything that you're doing on the side, and you're running doing a job and stuff. And now you can just come to AngelList and use the software and the offline infrastructure to power up these funds. But why I wrote to Naval, because I saw these three pieces of the triangle of angel investing, right? There are best people who are doing all of their investing in private. They don't want to ever put it up on a public platform just because signals or lack of they don't want to share it in the public domain, right? There's no incentive to do that. And as Naval says, that incentive is a superpower when you're doing some impactful work. And then there are these people, as internet has proliferated and a lot of people want to start investing into startups, there was no good place to access the best opportunities, right? Even if you want to pay up. And how venture fund managers make money in a venture deal is they take 20% carry, right? Anybody who's running a fund takes management fees, and venture fund carries like 20% of economic of the profits on a successful exit. So people want to pay up. They can't find the best opportunities. There are people who get the best deal flow in the country, but couldn't access these opportunities. And founders at the other end are also left shortchanged, right? Because their cap tables and nightmare of, doing paperwork in India is just a nightmare, right? Wet signatures and tens of compliances and all of that regulations and stuff. So assume that you have 20 angels in the cap table. You're I mean, just gonna spend like, I think a month or two in the most important days of your journey, just doing all of this stuff. So I wrote a novel and said that, hey, I think we've seen all of these problems in India. I spent a month working with the regulators and speaking with the lawyers and other people that here's why I think AngelList can work. And I wrote to him, and I think we hopped on a call the same day. 4 hours is what we spent together. And then the next 2 months we were debating here and there about what to do next. And he hired me as an advisor 2 months later. And a year and a half, I worked with the folks in the Securities and Exchange Commission equivalent of India called SEBI. And we launched in January 2018. We've become the most active seed investor country. We're investing in 2 startups per day. We're investing close to $100 million through the platform every year. And it's become this AWS of angel investing, where people have these products called syndicates and angel funds, where people can just pool capital, run their private investment clubs, and charge economics to people who are investing in them. And that's only on a successful exit. And what does AngelList get out of it? How do we become a venture style business? Is tech platform is there. We take a portion of this economics. So we have a non-linear upside. I think that's what venture investing is about having a non-linear upside. So we're like this tech-enabled largest venture fund in the world. And we built the infrastructure, and India luckily has a pretty exciting domestic ecosystem. We've got a large enough TAM for a lot of these businesses who are starting up and targeting this Indian demographic region. And then we've got a lot of angel investors who've come into this because they've read the headlines that, hey, people are raising absurd amount of capital in startups, people are investing in other startups. IPOs happened last year as well, 8-9 IPOs last year. We've got close to 100 unicorns as well. So the influx of people in terms of risk capital at the early stages also came together. And then, of course, there are these syndicate leads who he or she, they're doing the work in terms of sourcing good opportunities, using this infrastructure of ours and presenting those to the product group on the platform, which wants to invest online and remote base. So we've scaled up to like 500 companies. We've got 5-6 unicorns in our portfolio, and we're investing in 2 companies per day kind of pace now. And all of this managed by a team of 14. Everything is outsourced at AngelList India. So that's been what I've been up to over the last 5 years.
Yeah, that's awesome. And obviously, I would imagine lots has changed, since you started in early 2018 to now. Would love to get your perspective on, how you're seeing the ecosystem evolve, and talk to how, AngelList is adopting that and adding in new products to account for the changing ecosystem.
I think Mayuresh can tell you more also on that. But I think I remember like reading about the word startup in like 2011, 2012 for the first time. I think that's when Flipkart, that was the first real tech unicorn to come out of India. We've had InMobi before that, but Flipkart was this new age tech company selling like mobile phones and books online, similar to Amazon of India, started by 2x Amazon employees. And that's when I really like discovered what the word startup meant. And I think one of the early Flipkart founder interviews was pretty interesting, where he said that in India, given that the cultural overhang that we have, or the cultural baggage that we have, some of the startups actually had to advertise on television just so that they can hire employees who want to tell their parents that I'm working for this thing called a startup in the country. So that's and till now, when people go out in the market and say that I'm a startup founder, people really look up to them and respect. So I think that's been the big like macro shift that's happened in the last decade. And part of that is, people have done good, and I think the technology adoption and like many micro factors, like the launch of this telecom network called Jio, which made India the largest data consumer in the world at like the cheapest data rates of the world. So I think that really took us to this 500-700 million internet users in one single continent. So I think all of that opened up the market for a lot more people. And India is still growing. I think we're not there in terms of GDP per capita spend compared to say Indonesia or China. I think, but that's coming about. I think India has 50-60 million unique credit cards. So it's still a small market in terms of spending online. I think we've got people who are consuming data, but can we make transacting users out of them? That's still happening as a shift as well. So I think the first wave was we cloned everything that's worked in the West. We've got Uber of India, we've got Amazon of India, we've got a bunch of these companies of India. And luckily, India is somewhere between US, where US is too liberal with their policies and stuff, and China, which is like too close. So I think India is somewhere in that semi segment where we've let foreign companies come, we've given them a level playing field, but we've also protected our local companies where we have these foreign direct investment regulations which disallow foreign companies to own more than a certain percentage in some sectors as well. including retail. So a lot of the retailers that you see on more than 49% in some of the Indian e-commerce companies and stuff. So interesting mixes have come up as well. So, and then the second wave came. I think the first wave, we cloned everything that's working in the West. And the second wave was where we sort of built India for India solutions. We got Indian like sort of things that we learned that these small mom and pop business shops, and the Western solutions don't work for them. Like we're trying to build a mobile first accounting app for them. We're trying to build a mobile first payment solution for them. And along this while, I think the government really stepped up and gave us some codes like unified payment interface. It's like peer-to-peer, as simple as sending a WhatsApp message, free for life and free run days 24/7. So the public infrastructure really took off as well. We came up with Aadhaar, which is a unified identity system. Now we're doing the same for health related stuff as well. So I think it's pretty exciting what the country and the public goods have done in terms of that. It powered the second wave. And now I think we're in that third wave where we've seen Freshworks, Zoho, all of these SaaS companies from India list overseas have become extremely profitable. Some played the cost arbitrage, some are doing unique products and stuff. And now I think we're seeing founders like Mayuresh and others build more global facing products from India. And that I think is the true coming of an Indian, that's the true maturity, like the peak where we see that Indian founders can now truly play on a global playing field as well. And crypto, Web3, all of this SaaS enterprise software will come up about. So I think we're on level 3 now.
No, super fascinating. And yeah, we'll get a lot deeper into this in discussion on how that interfaces with the Australian ecosystem and the differences and what we can learn from each other. But just before that, I would love to also hear a bit more about the Galaxy Fund, understand that sort of the next evolution in terms of an ecosystem and now enabling, some of the founders to invest in the next generation of founders and how that came about, and your thoughts on the structure and again, why India as a place to do this.
So AngelList really moved the needle when we launched the infrastructure, right? And in the US, I think you'll see a lot more. I think the concept of founder investing in other founders, right? I think not just time, but you already see all of the Indian founders spending time with other Indian founders, be it like negotiating term sheets, getting help in hiring, just discussing anything under the sun on a weekend coffee. So you're already helping out other founders. And if we built the infrastructure, why is India not on the same level playing field as the US, where we're seeing almost some of the super founders in the US, they've reached a unicorn stage. They're already investing in other founders from their personal liquidity pool, right? They've probably taken some secondaries and stuff. And founders investing in other founders at the earliest days, I think that's the best form of empathy capital that you can bring. Of course, you can raise from syndicates, you can do from other things as well. But in the early days, founders don't have the time or the bandwidth to raise a mini fund or go out or have the inclination to write a memo for a syndicate to be able to attract capital, right? So what we said is, we've done this program, Naval and I were discussing that we've done this program in the US called Spearhead, where we're giving founders their first $1 million or $2 million to start investing in other founders. We give you the back office. AngelList powers all of this with one single click on the platform. And instead of just investing time, we think that you can be the best sources of supporting, you can be the best sources of early stage deal flow. So we're giving you the checkbook, no questions asked kind of freedom. This is your fund. We set up your entity in the US and you can invest and support in other founders. And if you follow good hygiene practices, which we coach you with minimal programming, you spend 1 hour with us every month. And we bring you up to speed on pretty much anything that's available on angel investing publicly, but we still dive into some real case studies with you. Invest in other founders and we'll keep topping up that fund for you. So you never have to worry about raising capital. We give you the infrastructure, we give you the capital, we give you the knowledge, and venture capital is just a combination of knowledge, control, and advice, right? We give all of that to you in a single bundle, and you can start doing the best work. And we think that this is the way a new venture firm would look, where you're decentralized to that extent that you don't rely on 4 people who are growing old year by year, but you're really just sort of building this Y Combinator of early stage founders who are coming in batches. We're keeping the batch size fairly small, 5 people every 6 months, and they're investing in other founders. We keep refreshing this cohort, and this becomes this community where everyone's helping each other, much like what you do at Earlywork as well, in terms of deal flow, and they're investing and helping become better founders as well. And we raised a $45 million fund. We're backed by Naval, Tim Ferriss, Elliot Kill, Lockheed Group, all of these people who were great founders once and now are great investors to come and talk with the cohorts.
Yeah, it's a fascinating concept, and look forward to following the progress. I'm sure. Yeah, a lot of us here are super interested to see how it goes. I'm sure there's a lot of lessons we can take in terms of how we lay that into the Australian ecosystem as well as we take the next evolution of our ecosystem journey. I would love to hear from Mayuresh now, and hear a bit more about the Chronicle story. Being currently now based in the Australian startup scene, but very sort of involved originally with the ecosystem in India and having a lot of the team based in India, and start to hear about some of the unique experiences you've had across both landscapes.
Yeah, sure. I was just telling someone today that I'm a bit of a double agent. I'm from the Indian ecosystem or the Australian, depending on who you ask and the situation. I think I've played that to my advantage a bit. Chronicle story is unique. It kind of starts in the same time where like Utsav was describing the early sort of startups in India coming around. I was still at uni then, so I went to uni around like 2011, and that's when these startups were coming up and coming out. And interestingly enough, I was right at the epicenter of the startup boom in India, which was sort of my university. And so by being at the right place at the right time, I kind of got an exposure to all of these amazing startups, and a lot of my seniors were essentially founders of these startups who were taking the first leap. I happened to get very interested in design and picked up design and started working with these founders to help them build and design their product and launch it in the market, which was sort of my first exposure to what a startup even is. It was quite a foundational experience in many ways. The way it links to Chronicle is during this time, I started doing a lot of workshops around like design and teaching my friends design. And as a part of those workshops, I used to make presentations and inevitably got bombarded with the question of how I make my presentations. And that sort of carried forward over the last 5 years across BCG, across digital ventures, or across any public presentation that I had done. And in an effort to sort of answer that question in a more meaningful way, I started Chronicle, which is essentially trying to think about what's the most purposefully built presentation format for today. So yeah, that's probably been my journey. I got to experience the startup world in India from the other side of the lens, almost like amongst those like founders and kind of working with them day in and day out, and got to see a lot of things that worked at that point, but also saw a few things that were deterrents for people like myself. Like when I graduated from uni, I was super clear that I would never want to be a founder, given what I had seen in that journey. And when I look back now and I look at the Indian ecosystem and how far it has come in just like 6-7 years, it's absolutely incredible to see the journey that system itself has had. So yeah, and I genuinely believe what Utsav says is true. The next wave of Indian startups is opening it up and building for the globe. That's what we haven't seen yet, and we've started seeing that just like happening. But Figma or Notion haven't come out of India yet. But I feel that's the next level that India will soon bridge, and we've started seeing that happening already. Yeah.
Fascinating. Thanks for sharing your story, Mayuresh. I'd love to understand a bit more on the like company running side, and sort of initially setting up in India, moving to Australia, having a team based all around the world. What's generally been your experience in terms of managing that, and sharing advice with other founders in terms of having a startup run across multiple ecosystems at an early stage?
I was already in Sydney when I started Chronicle, and my co-founder at that point was in Malaysia. So we were already sort of remote, so to say, just between the two of us. We knew from the beginning that it's the right time to build a remote first company. And so sort of took that leap and took that almost as a stretch goal. It wasn't this obvious to the world that like remote is sort of the future, and therefore it wasn't obvious to us either. And we saw that as like a bit of a challenge. But as we started building the team and hiring across not just India, but like Australia as well, and a little bit in Europe, UK, Netherlands, and so on, we started seeing that it is definitely hard, But if you build the right processes from the beginning, after say 3 or 4 months, it really starts yielding dividends. I actually believe that the India system, like India ecosystem and Australia ecosystem, are super complementary. Like they literally have opposite traits, but they work very, very well together. And I don't really know a lot of examples of this partnership happening before, but with Chronicle, hopefully we'll try and set a bit of an example of how these two sort of ecosystems can come together, bring their superpowers, and build for the globe. I genuinely think there's a lot of power there and a lot to like learn between the two ecosystems.
I think we need to get you an ambassador role, the Australian India Chamber of Commerce.
I mean,
yeah, something I was thinking about, which I'd love to get both of your perspectives on, is, I mean, in Australia, one of the reasons why Earlywork was formed is around this literacy of, you know, getting the best students and best young people out of university, getting into work in startups. But we found that the literacy and understanding of, you know, young people coming out of university isn't necessarily as much deeply embedded in the mind share in terms of comparing that to some of the more traditional industries, like we chatted about before, Utsav, and, you know, banking, consulting, et cetera, and you know what it means to have a, you know, successful career. So I'd love to understand if any of you could comment on, you know, sort of the because we take a lot of inspiration from the States, and where, you know, the brightest young talent tend to flock to Silicon Valley, working on these amazing companies changing the world. Would love to understand in terms of the, you know, building the next generation of talent, how that sort of you know, operates within from an Indian perspective, and the universities and education system, and how involved they are with these companies.
I'm happy to jump in, but like keen to hear Utsav's thoughts on this as well. I actually think this is something that we can definitely sort of get inspired from India about, because a lot of the successful founders, as well as like early employees in some of these successful companies, are just undergrads. It is also one of the only countries and geographies where engineering undergrads are hired into like even consulting roles for that matter. And so I feel a lot of successful people have come out of that journey after just sort of jumping into things right after uni. I really think if there's obviously technical skills to learn and a lot of sort of polishing to do and exposure to get. I genuinely believe there's only one thing that separates these sort of two systems, which is ambition. If you look at how competitive the Indian ecosystem is, it almost directly leads to people having an insane amount, like unthinkable amount of drive right from like early days, like even before their university. And as they sort of start maturing and learning a few technical skills, that drive and that ambition really translates into something bigger. And these are usually the people who take the plunge to do something of their own. They back themselves up and take the plunge. I feel that ambition is exactly what we need to replicate in Australia without taking anything away from this ecosystem. I feel sometimes there's that reluctance to go the extra mile, to dream like bigger than like what's already available. I feel India does a great job at this, because a lot of the people just come from immense struggle, and they're always sort of ambitious to sort of break the glass ceiling. But yeah, that's something that we can surely learn here in Australia from the Indian system. Yeah.
No, I think that's absolutely valid. And I think some of the early stuff, I think why India became a little more risk-taking is we had these big companies, Amazon and stuff, set up their back office in India. So India has always been that back office mindset. And all it took was two people deciding that, hey, why don't we sell our own books? Why are we listing on Bazi or Amazon? To just literally kickstart that moment. So sometimes you never know what really happens. And I mean, we've done and debated a lot in university about why Silicon Valley was successful. Some of that was attributed to Stanford and some of those Bay Area universities doing great deep research, either medical or military or some of that stuff, which really translated like these big PhD projects like Google and all of that stuff came into this thing. So I think an ecosystem which accepts failure, I think does, along with great talent, I think will definitely drive some of that stuff, right? I think we're always talking about like big successes, but I think it should be more acceptable to talk about big failures as well. And the more we're accepting of that, then you give stuff, I mean, some of the ingredients like a big market, a good amount of capital and good quality talent coming out from domestic universities, and you've got this mix. And India luckily benefited recently from this reverse brain drain as well, where you have these awesome engineers who've done their undergrad in India, maybe masters in the US, working at Amazon, Uber, anywhere in the US on the West, Silicon Valley and stuff, and now they're moving back up. And over the last couple of years, Scofi's benefited from the fact that it's all like world has become flat in COVID, right? Everyone's, I mean, I'm speaking to folks in Australia now and sitting in the Indian time zone. So you really don't have to get on a flight or be restricted to talent even in the domestic market. And Mayuresh can, I think, set up that example pretty well. And in India, I think we have Coinbase, Uber, all of these people running their back office tech hubs in India. And funny enough, like, I mean, interesting that in India, I mean, I landed in Bangalore like 2 years back, this thing, and saw these ads for Gojek, which is an Indonesian unicorn, but all of their tech majorly runs in India. So, so people have done this cross-border stuff early on as well, and now with the world becoming flat, with crypto, Web3, all of this stuff, I think talent is truly like available to everyone and anyone. So I think we just need to be more accepting of risk and failure. And I think I've read up about big successes coming out of Australia as well, Canva and a few others. And I think that should talent from there, once they've gotten liquidity and some safety net or early on in their careers, I think they should just jump in.
For sure. No, a lot of interesting. Yeah, I really like the point you made around failure. And I think Australia has a very interesting way to go in terms of learning how to accept failure and celebrate failure as a means of driving more innovation into the ecosystem. Something I just wanted to touch on as well in terms of the ecosystems is, like for context now, it's election season in Australia, and you know, something of which there hasn't really been much of a talking point is around, you know, tech and startups, but on a like a per capita basis, I think it's the third biggest industry. There's a program now called Tech Council of Australia. They have a clear path to, you know, make it the #1 contributor to GDP in Australia. I would love to understand from India's perspective, like what role has the government played in terms of public policy, in terms of driving innovation to the sector, and would love to learn, you know, sort of any lessons that we can take to Australia as well.
I think in 2016, the Prime Minister of India launched this thing called Startup India program. I think most of the stuff they were offering within that program, like tax benefits for first 3 years, which doesn't make sense because profits don't exist for startups in the first 3 years for most of it, and just generally some of the other stuff. But I think he said this one key line that the objective of Startup India, the program itself, is that government should get out of the way. They shouldn't be in your way or they shouldn't be there, right? I think it's a founder's journey. And if you're playing with the safety net, then you shouldn't be a founder also. It's the very hard, cold truth, but you really don't need support from the government. I think I mean, in a world which is flat now, you can raise capital from sitting anywhere in the world. You can hire anyone else in the world. You don't really need the government to do that. I think the government should really just get out of the way instead of playing catching ball in this space. That's my personal take. And India has, of course, done some infrastructural bit. I think infrastructure is part of the government, where they've done unified payment interface, which has spawned a lot of awesome fintech companies. They're doing the same for health tech now through their universal health ID and all of that other stuff, which is needed to build all of this stuff. And India's got a robust banking system. So apart from focusing on all of that and giving good infrastructure and facilities and all of that stuff, I think they should mostly not be involved, is my take.
Mayuresh, any thoughts from you?
I think, I mean, I don't think I'm the best person to like have an opinion on this topic, but honestly, I feel like Australia is in a pretty, it has its unique challenges in that it's such a sort of like super consolidated, very small, like 25 million people kind of a market. And so for the government to play like an active role where it's almost like very difficult for economics to work out if people are building for Australia, it becomes very challenging even for the government to play like a more pronounced sort of role or even support things. I think there are other things that the government can do, which can encourage like building for the globe, but then the incentives are just not as aligned as it would be in a place like India, for example, where more entrepreneurial movement just sort of trickles into public sector as well. So Australia has its like own challenges on this front. I feel it's also like pretty epic already. Like it took me a long time to set up my subsidiary in India, but it was literally like a 2-day thing in Australia. It's relatively like easier and like less bureaucratic. It's already kind of there. I don't think there's much more else to do. It's just like simplistic outlook on things. Yeah, like I said, I'm not the expert on the topic.
Cool. All right. Well, I think we're going to move now to some audience questions. I've noted quite a few that come through. For anyone else in the audience to ask a question, I think Marina has been dropping the slider link in there as the best way to do that. If you want to ask a question yourself, feel free to put your name on it. Otherwise, you can ask anonymous questions too. I'll jump on into the first one, which is an anonymous one and directed for Mayuresh. So what do you make of the Australian venture capital landscape, both as compared to the Indian landscape, but also more broadly?
Putting me in a tough spot here. I think it's amazing. I feel, I mean, I've interacted with a bunch of folks here in the VC landscape here. It's actually super interesting. The VC landscape is almost like ahead of the startup landscape. Some of the VCs have sort of really built like a very sophisticated practice. They already have niches. There's a large number. I saw a list floating around where there were like 100 institutional like investors in Australia already. They're also more like, in my experience, I think they're also more upfront and founder friendly, and like sort of come in and approach founders and try to sort of build a bit of a relationship. And it's not as transactional or sort of cutthroat as I've sort of seen elsewhere. So I think it's already pretty epic. I think as the ecosystem grows, life for these VCs will become slightly easier, because it's hard to manage like a fund that's sort of less than $100 million. It's really hard to make the numbers work, especially with limited movement happening in the geography. So as the number of startups grow, I think we'll see like these VCs sort of growing a bit. I feel there's like a bit of room for some amount of like consolidation there, probably, because there's a long tail of like small investors in this country. It's probably 3 or 4 big ones. So that's probably my view. Not sure if I answered the question. It's a great ecosystem. I think they're amazing investors. Almost all of them are operator led, which is amazing. So I have tremendous respect for most of the people that I've interacted with.
Just for me to learn, like any of these VC firms actively doing these seed programs or incubators, accelerators like Y Combinator, Sequoia Surge in India, or any of these early stage programs, which gives even early stage risk capital slightly easier, along with like sort of knowledge and advice as well to founders, or that's not existent?
There's a bunch of them. So there's things like Antler, there's things like StartMate, which are aimed at extremely early stage, sort of like pre-seed founders to get in and have a few learnings. There are also ways and means for these people to get on the cap table through these programs. So I think there is there are things like those, probably potential to have a few more. I think what's more interesting and exciting is like communities. Like it's not a shameless plug. I'm not even a part of Earlywork, but I think communities like Earlywork are actually like really the buzzing sort of place where a lot of the activity is happening. That I see a future where there's like investment happening in circles like these, which will be quite awesome. It's one more thing to add there. I feel big VCs like the Accels and Sequoias and Tigers of the world, they don't really have an Australia office, but like there is presence, like there's like this invisible presence that they have. But I feel like people don't really find them super accessible. Like Dovetail and Atlassian both are Accel portfolio companies. But I don't know if people really have access to, say, Rich or like other folks at Accel from here. So I'm not sure how that works. Yeah.
So like, I think the Indian venture market is approximately 1/8 the size of the US market. Last year, I think 39 billion was invested in the Indian markets, which is approximately 1/8 of the US venture market.
Awesome. Great discussion. We'll move on to the next question. I think Alaha had a couple questions she wanted to ask. Alaha, if you want to take yourself off mute.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming on. I have a question for both of you from a early career advice. I was wondering what helped you be the specific knowledge or quality that you have that made you become a moat to attracting opportunities to yourself and eventually getting backing from legends like Tim Ferriss, Naval, and Mayuresh from Utsav, and in general to support your mission. Would love some of your advice. Thank you.
Mayuresh, do you want to go first?
No, I think you should go first. I don't even belong on that list of names that are
I've heard the Naval podcast and his thoughts and stuff. I'm literally drinking the Kool-Aid every single day. We've done a podcast together as well. And luckily, because of Galaxy, I speak to him pretty much every other day. He's helping me like sort of the early thinking, this thing. So I get a peek inside his thought process when I pose him some interesting questions. But I think, he pretty much posts the best of it online as well. So how do you define yourself to be the top 25% in anything that you do? I think that's what you should aspire for. And I think that's an experiment that you should start early on in your life and be naturally curious about something. I think a lot of people have in the last year or two jumped into Web3 or crypto and stuff. But when the tide turns, you might not be excited about it, right? I think it's a factor of capital and all of that stuff, which has excited a lot of people. But I think being naturally curious about something. When I started blogging about crypto, I think pretty early on in 2015, 2016, I was early. That's why I became the first check into CoinD6, which is now the largest crypto exchange in the country. And I met them on a Twitter and chat on Sunday and all of that stuff. So I was naturally curious about it. And part of that was just being close to AngelList and CoinList and now also. So how do you like find areas which are unique to you? And I think internet has sort of made it tougher now. I think when I was like posting articles about startups and venture ecosystem in India in 2014, 2015, not many people were doing it, or angel investing back in the day, or just learning about all of this in public. So that I think gave me the inroads to do something like this pretty uniquely for India as well. So what can you do or think about so curiously, very uniquely that is unique to you? I think that's a journey that you have to think about and self-reflection moment for you internally. And I think nobody has the right answer to that, but I think if you set up the right processes and path for you to discover that, I think it'll come to you eventually.
Yeah, I love that answer. Curiosity is definitely the way. Would love to hear from Mayuresh as well. I mean, you mentioned ambition being something that's really valuable. Would love to hear more.
I think I genuinely believe the biggest trouble that say people face in very early parts of their career is just figuring out what they want to do, like where to go, right? And I believe strongly that the solution to that in the very early days is just exploring. And I feel that's just another name for having curiosity. So trying to expose yourself to as many things as possible, and then just being sort of open to trying new things and getting that exposure. Once a little bit of exposure happens, then I think there's room for developing expertise so that you can become better than anyone else at like a couple of things, and then sort of going much deeper. And then I feel the next step is taking risk and backing yourself. I feel like at each of these stages, there's challenges, of course. For example, like when in your career, if you're taking like a slightly uncharted path, I surely took one. And I remember I heard so much like negativity that you kind of like doubt yourself. Like right after BCG, I did the usual consulting stuff. Like I interviewed with VCs, I interviewed with Ps. I had a PE offer, and then I rejected that, took a pay cut, came to Australia and joined as a very junior UI designer. And almost everyone told me not to do it. And I feel that's made all the difference. Like I wouldn't have done my own startup today if I hadn't come to DV and like tried design again. So I think sometimes it's okay to take that risk as long as it's in the spirit of like getting more and more exposure. And I'm saying this fully aware of the fact that I'm very early in my own career. I'm barely 5 years out of uni. So I think it's literally just that, like getting exposure, developing expertise, and then taking the right risk at any given point in time. Yeah.
That's inspiring. Thank you so much, guys. Sorry.
Mark Anderson
Yeah.
said something that I think the future is already here as this thing, and you just need to find ways to distribute it, right? I think what unique insight you can pick up from the world that you expose yourself to, and how can you distribute it at scale and have an action for bias, and magic will happen eventually on a long enough time horizon.
Some awesome insights there. Would love to hand it over to Daryl, who also asked a very interesting question.
Yep. Hey, Utsav. Daryl here from Singapore, from SMU as well. So
wow.
great to see you. Yeah. So my question is mainly on what's a contrarian belief you have about startups or VCs in India, and how does that affect the ecosystem, not just in India, but in Asia and globally as well?
I think the most contrarian.
So basically, anything unpopular that you might have about.
We don't have any unpopular, contrarian beliefs. I think that's, by the time like somebody discusses it, already is non-contrarian to some extent, if it's this thing. But I think generally most VCs are unhelpful. Like I think a lot of people just with big fat checkbooks try to give themselves too much credit. I think it's the best founders don't need any help at all. Like literally they might need you 1 hour in a couple of months just to help you out, but most VCs try to give themselves too much credit, and you can see that in the product that Tiger Global has created, right? All of these mid-stage VCs are going to lose out, where you're running this 100-200 million fund. You're not adding any value apart from like just a tier 2, tier 3 brand name, but you have these Axels and Sequoias, which have of course got this heritage working for them. So it's that flywheel is working. They backed awesome companies and founders, and the end of the day, that brand enhances. So they're getting good founders come to them because of that. And Tiger Global at the other end, the barbell end, where I'm gonna give you cheap, fast capital at your price and move out of the way. There is no advice. You go to Bain Capital and learn all of that consulting knowledge, but don't come to me. And in the middle, there are these people who are trying to started late in the VC game. They have this $100-200 million fund, trying to give themselves too much importance that they're really making an impact and cheering founders on Twitter and delivering any real value, but I think they lose out. So I think the VC world will also see a bunch of new products come up. And at AngelList, we believe that we're at the other end where we're empowering these solo GPs. And some of the solo GPs in the US, like Elliott Gill, Lockheed Groom, they're running $500 million funds each as an individual, right? So they've realized that the product is founder-backed capital. You probably need 1 hour per day from the VC backing you, right? And if a founder can give them a $5 million, $10 million check now, you don't need to go through that VC firm and answer all of that questions and go through this lengthy process and paperwork and be involved in that age-old process now. So I think we'll see all of these new models come up and new products come up in the venture world, where I think somewhere in the middle, these people are going to get crushed.
Yeah, completely makes sense. And there's I'm actually sharing a bit more. Amy Lewin from Sifted, like from the Europe's biggest startup newsletter, she said VC kind of media should be banned because of so much fluff and yeah, no substance at all. So yeah, interesting thoughts from you, Utsav. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Daryl. Question from an anonymous source, but also super curious to hear the answer. I think Mayuresh touched on some really interesting points. And as the future ambassador of Australian India Chamber of Commerce, the first question is just to learn a bit more about, you mentioned, the Australian Indian ecosystem has a lot that's very complementary, and would love to hear maybe a bit more in granular detail about what those components are.
Yeah, sure. I think I was thinking about this like before this call, and I feel there's a lot that both of them can learn from each other. So for example, like in India, we spoke about like the ambition and the tenacity that stems from that ambition. There's also this like ability to place quality and like success over everything, including like sometimes a little bit over just like personal feelings. I don't think there's a right or wrong way to do this, and probably both ecosystems need to learn this. But I feel like in India, people are way more direct. They don't take things personally. So you walk into a room and just battle things out, absolutely tear each other down. And the quality of the thinking goes up. You walk out of the room besties again, like get a beer. I think that really, really needs to happen in Australia. I feel that that's like a learning that surely can happen here. I feel like we're very protective of everyone's feelings in the room. Nothing wrong with that, but I feel it shouldn't be attached to like taking feedback personally. I also feel like Indian startups have traditionally sort of stemmed out of operating quite leanly, and that lean operation often like produces the best results. Like Zoho, an example that Utsav mentioned, like there is zero venture capital and just started from scratch and built such a massive organization. There's a lot to learn from how to operate in a bit more of a lean environment at all times. I feel Indian startup ecosystem can also learn a lot from Australia. My eyes just opened after like spending 4 years in Australia, specifically on the topic of sustainability. I feel I'm 100% sure a lot of my friends and a lot of other Indian founders, if they listen to this, they'll still go, what sustainability is. It's just like fluff. But I genuinely believe there's like a better way to operate than glorifying like hustle culture. And so I feel people deliver the best output in the best time if they have the time and mental bandwidth to operate, which I have personally seen this like quite closely, and I'm hoping it has changed now. That oftentimes that doesn't happen. Like recently, I've been talking to a lot of Indian founders about building a remote first company, because there's been like a lot of work from home happening and a migration happening. A lot of the times those questions were framed as, if I can't see my employees in front of my eyes, how do I hold them accountable, or how do I extract value from them? And like, you don't. That is, I mean, I'm doing this for the first time, but it's very, very obvious to me that what we should optimize as founders should be ownership and not accountability. That's just the wrong way of looking at things. And so I feel there's surely a page from the Australian book that India can borrow, which is really sort of baking in sustainability and figuring out what like work and life and what their places in like people's life are, because people can't work when they're overpressured and forced and constrained. And I think probably final point, I think India can learn, and I think it already has, but there's like a lot more to learn on this, is having an equal seat at the table. I felt like in Australia, all professions, all functions, any hierarchy, like all of them have an equal seat at the table, and creates like a bit of a flatter hierarchy. Comparatively, like when I came out of India, for example, there was pretty much design was an afterthought, for example. I can already see that being changed. There are a lot of like design-led companies now in India, and I think that that journey should just continue. And Australia does a great job at this. So I think there's a lot to learn. I feel people should hire a lot more from the other ecosystem. So Indians should hire from the Australian ecosystem. Probably a little bit difficult to do that given the costs, but Australia should definitely tap into the Indian talent pool. It's getting more and more expensive, so you don't have a lot of time, but that's an immense talent pool that people should tap into, not just for developers, which is the traditional sort of stereotype, but also for strategy positions. Some of the most amazing like strategy, GTM, like operations folks have come out of India. Indians can take experience from here and replicate some of that sustainability in their way of like building businesses and operating. And I think just like educating each other on the nuances of each other's countries is probably the last thing that they should do. Yeah.
Awesome. Very beautifully explained. And I think there's a lot of interesting insights there that, you know, both could learn from each other. And hopefully the start of a lot more dialogue between the two ecosystems in terms of programs, initiatives that I think come out of this. Final quick question, and would love to get a quick 30-second answer from both of you, which is from an anonymous source, but favorite Indian startup we should all know about? Mayuresh, why don't we start with you?
Did you say a notable Indian startup that we don't know about? Is that the question?
Favorite Indian startup that we should all know about?
Indian startup. Wow.
Any particular stage, size, boundary conditions, or anything under the sun?
Guardrails.
I mean, I don't know if this is like a popular opinion, but I do believe this is literally just what came to my mind. When I moved to Australia first, I tried to like find like places to see food, and I saw Zomato here. And I remember Zomato is an Indian startup. And I saw Ola as well. Ola is actually from my uni, like built by one of my college seniors. And I think that was inspiring. I wouldn't say they're like my favorite startup. Seeing that is definitely inspiring. So that's what comes to my mind right now. Yeah.
Oh, to be honest, I mean, Chronicle, I'm waiting to get my hands on the product, but Mayuresh doesn't want to give me access.
You played it safe. You played it safe.
I mean, two different hats, right? I think some of the stuff that I use as a consumer, I probably wouldn't invest in them personally. I love some of the conveniences that are brought about by this 10-minute delivery startups. Like, I mean, it's amazing when the VC-funded world can get you a bottle of water and a packet of chips in like 10 minutes to your doorstep and no delivery fees, right? So, I mean, as a consumer, I love some of this stuff where I can book AC service and all of that stuff, Urban Company and Swiggy, Instamart, and a bunch of these delivery companies which are there. And in terms of favorite startup as an investor, of course, I mean, it's a mixed bag again, like from crypto to anything under the sun. I'm learning to become users of some of the enterprise stuff as well, and we're trying to adopt some of the new stuff. So whenever Mayuresh gives us access to Chronicle, instantly I'll switch.
Yeah, I'm sure pretty hard to pick a favorite child, and it seems like you got lots of children. Basically that wraps up all the questions that we had. There's a few more there. Maybe we can ask them in a virtual capacity afterwards, but would love to give you both opportunity just to, if there's an ask or a way in which they can find you on socials or something they can do to learn a bit more about you, to give you the opportunity to do that. So Utsav, do you want to start?
I'm on LinkedIn, I'm Twitter, my DMs are open. My email is utsav@angel.co, so feel free to write to me.
Yeah, I mean, I'm on Earlywork, so I think that's probably the best way to DM me. But yeah, obviously happy to connect on LinkedIn. I just moved to Surrey Hills, so if anyone's around, always happy to grab a coffee. Yeah.
Lovely. Not a paid advertisement, but appreciate the shout out. Awesome. Well, thanks to both of you for taking the time. This is an awesome conversation. It's recorded, so hopefully we can share it with some people who signed up but couldn't attend. But as I said before, I think this is a really interesting conversation. Hopefully we'll start a lot more dialogue between the two ecosystems. And Utsav, if you're ever in Australia, give us a holler and we'll show you around Surrey Hills and the startup ecosystem here. It's a lot of fun.
Definitely.
All right. All the best. Thanks everyone for jumping on, and catch you all soon.
Thanks, Utsav. Cheers, guys. Bye.
Thank you.